to this Artist Talk with Ernst van der Loo. Welcome, Ernst.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for being here. Ernst van der Loo is doing a residency in spatial audio synthesis right now, and we have the chance to get to know him better and I think get to know his artistic practice a bit better. Ernst is from Netherlands, living now in Norwegia.
Yeah.
And a composer and performer. And also he has studied, he has a bachelor from the Sonology, Institute of Sonology in Den Haag. And has also a master from the Norwegian Music Academy in Oslo. I think also an important detail is that he's been working till today, I think, also as a sound engineer in the theater domain. So brings together knowledge from different perspectives, and that's always a very interesting.
Yeah, that's. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, because it's an honor to be here, and it's an amazing studio to work in. I really like it here. It sounds amazing, and there's space around me. I'm used to the Spatial Audio Studio at Notam in Oslo, which is a bit more, let's say, a bit more claustrophobic. It's basically like wearing a big headphones. So the speakers are more or less just beyond your arms there, so that's something else. So yeah, it's nice to have some air around. Yeah, like Micha, yeah, sorry, said, I also have a background in audio engineering, and that's basically also my background as a composer. I'm very much coming from a technical background, audio engineering, but very much a perceptive background. So, like, is it correct what I do? Hardly anything what I do is correct, I think. But if it sounds good, then it sounds good. That's basically one of my my philosophies. So yeah, I have a bit of a skeleton for a talk. I'm not really much of a public speaker, so you guys have to drag me through. I have some technical fun stuff that I want to show you, and I want to play you some stuff. And yeah, well, I moved to Norway in 2014, and that time I was still basically an audio engineer with an unused bachelor in electronic music from Sonology. Obviously I did something with it, but I was also an improvising musician, but I hadn't really done a lot of pieces until then. And in 2016 I suddenly came to the realization, like, hey, wait, I'm doing something wrong here. I'm over 40 years old, and I have this interest, and I should maybe do a master's. And then I was accepted at the academy in Oslo, and I got to study with Natasha Barrett, who, as some of you might know, is one of the specialists in ambisonics in the world and an excellent composer. And it was like the first year was extremely intense because I had zero knowledge about spatial audio in that sense. What I knew was basically the old-fashioned Germanic Stockhausen König style of doing 8 channels, 4 channels, and that was about it. And you can do nice stuff in that, but and I'll come back to that later, I guess. But there's so much more if you go for an for a medium as like ambisonics, where you can actually use all the knowledge from the other fields that you know, like the traditional stuff. You can just pack it into ambisonics, and it also works, and it has some nice extra features there as well. So around the second year that I studied in Oslo, the masters, I sort of got the hang of ambisonics. It takes a while, and I mainly learned it through Spat, what you saw earlier here. And at that time, that was around 2018, the whole plugins were way less evolved than they are now. It's gone really fast in the last few years with ambisonic plugins and different institutes having all these free things, among which here, the amazing plugins here, and the plugins from IEM, the plugins from Alto, from Finland. And the nice thing, they all work seemingly nice together. Then when I finally got it sort of hanging, like that I knew my knowledge, where that I got my grasp on the knowledge for ambisonics, then you start to think like, okay, now I have to start thinking about composing pieces, which is something that sometimes is a bit of a thing then, that you sort of, okay, what are you going to do with that knowledge? And in that sense, I had some really good talks with some people, fellow students. There weren't many, but I had some real good fellow students. One was here last year, Mariam, and I have another colleague, Giuseppe Pisano, Italian guy, that both way younger than me, but amazing composers, both of them. And we sort of had these discussions about what you can do, and we're all three of us are very different composers in that sense. So yeah, I think that my praxis, what I said earlier, basically very much comes from a perceptual approach. And during my studies at sonology, I was very interested in psychoacoustics also. And then, not that I'm a huge specialist there, but there were some golden nuggets in the material there of the like which frequencies trigger certain feelings or certain alarm triggers. There's like, for instance, the high mid frequencies that are sort of the breaking twigs. If something or some animal approaches you, that triggers sort of an alarm cue, and those and big rumble stuff that you'll hear that back in my music later. I'm very fond of triggering those buttons. So so basically my approach the last few years has been very much looking beyond the normal approach that a lot of people take, is either the realism, where they use field recordings and try to make it sound as clean and clear as possible and make you want to be in that scene and try to be as realistic as possible. And I think my approach is more, yes, I want the experience to be realistic, what you feel, that it is something that could be real, but I don't want it to be real, because we do have all these digital tools, and like for instance in cinema, not everyone is making documentaries. There's a lot more people are making fictional music and or fictional movies, and so I find that a bit problematic, the realism bug that a lot of people have. So yeah, that's a bit of a first babble about what my thing is. I'm forgetting one more thing here, is that I've also worked for more than 20 years with analog synths and lots of modular sounds. And the moment I started working with spatial audio, my first trigger was to sort of leave that behind me for a moment, just to learn spatial audio in a different way. And I'm slowly starting to integrate more and more like analog synthesis sounds again, But my music that I make purely with the analog synth is something completely different than the music that I do with spatial audio, and sort of this, I try to sort of bridge that gap a bit, but recently it has become a bit more bridged, but it's hard to integrate it together. But I'll come to that. Okay, so yeah, I told earlier that I chose ambisonics very consciously at a certain point, because I think it's an excellent container to put other techniques in. And my approach with ambisonics is not so much, a lot of people actually use the plugins often with just mono sources and panning them around, and I find that a bit like this whole object-based kind of way of working with Atmos also is a bit problematic, I think, where you reduce a sound to an ideal point in space, and in reality that is not really what happens. A sound is always more than just a small point that moves around, and there's always reflections. There's reflections from the floor, from the wall. And in that sense, I always try to, if I have a mono sound that I want to work with, I often try to see if I can take it apart and spread it around, or try to find some other sound that complements it in a way where I juxtapose it, that you don't really notice that's a different sound. But I often have it as a sort of group of points that are moving around. And one of the tricks that I use, that I showed Johannes earlier this week also, is that I'm very fond of using ambisonics delays that are not delaying just what happens in the point in mono on the other side or whatever, but it sort of delays the whole ambisonics field. Because when you move something around one point in an ambisonics field and you have an ambisonics delay, the whole path is being traced then. That's the beauty that you get for free. If you have a mono delay that you just spatialized, and then you have to follow it yourself. It's a lot of work. And if you put an ambisonics delay there, you get that movement for free. That's one of the points how I go about things. One of the other great things that I think that happened in the last few years is the mics like the Zelia that are incredibly cheap compared to the other possibilities that are out there. And the Zelia has been something that I've been playing with now for 2 years and has sort of featured in a few of my pieces. But it's always very much in a sort of restricted way, because I'm very skeptical about the sound quality. It's a nice mic, but it is a bit nasal, and I've been doing some tricks around it. I've been talking with some people, and I found some. That's maybe, I don't know how many people here actually have used the Zelia, but so what you get, I'll first explain it a bit. There's 18 sensors there, or 19 sensors that are picking up the sound around, and then there's several plugins that they have, that now you have to, it was a nice cash grab they did there, but I'll leave that personal opinion around. But you can go straight to ambisonics from this, and for some material that works perfectly, and it has a nice spatial I think, at least good enough for what I do. But for some material, it sort of lacks depth and it lacks a bit of low end. And so I was searching around and I came to the website of Mr. Angelo Farina, which is a mathematics professor from Italy, who has done a lot of research in ambisonics. He's basically tested every microphone around. And he came up with an idea which is kind of very interesting. He makes virtual microphones from, he first started from the ambisonics B format. So he first converted it to ambisonics. That's how he started. And he did put it on a website here a bit, where you... This is the technical bit that he put out. He does this with totally different tools than me, but and he does it with a second order microphone, I think. But the basic idea is that he decodes the second order ambisonics thing out with just a basic. This is the basic decoder to 12 discrete channels. And so the main part is that you have this virtual mic setup, which is a, if you look in this plugin, for instance, it's called T-Design. This is in the alto decoder and encoder. It's a standard setup. That's a mathematical spread of points over a bulb, over a sphere. I think it's Mr. Chebyshev that came up with this, but I'm no mathematician. So, but basically you have 20, with this microphone you use 24 virtual microphones, and you get out 24 channels. And those channels are 24 discrete channels. So they're basically 24 microphone signals that you have. So it's not ambisonics anymore. And as some of you might know, with ambisonics you can't treat separate channels differently than others, because then your whole spatial image is collapsing, which is most of the time not desirable. So with these channels you can do anything, and he basically thought of it for denoising and those kind of thing, and for other non-regular approaches like compressing, distorting. So if you want to do something rough to the signal, that is something that is, then you are advised to do it outside of the ambisonics realm. So this was an approach. So you then treat these channels and then you re-encode them into ambisonics with the same setup, and this is very important. And do mind that different producers of plugins have different approaches on how to put these points where, as I found out the hard way. For instance, Spat has a different coordinate system, even though they work with ambics and their coordinates go the other way around. So that's a bit of prying in the dark. Costs you a few weeks and you'll find out. But the beauty is that you have those 24, in my case, 24 channels, and you can basically re-encode them to any order that you want. You won't get more definition, but still, if your whole piece is 7th order, it's very nice for posterity and, you know, just for peace of mind to not have to deal with different order channels in your project. So in that sense, it's kind of a brilliant method, I think. And next to that, the fun part is if you only want to use like the top part of the ambisonics bulb, it's totally legal to leave out the bottom microphones, because, or you can say like, I only want this part of the shell. So you get like, you get some artistic freedom in that sense again. You can get like crazy, or as my friend Giuseppe the Italian composer, and also he has made some kind of re-encoder in Max where he sort of makes the bulb move around, so you get sort of this image that I haven't heard it yet, but I've just seen his patch go, and where the ball is basically just moving around like a rubber ball. Sounds very interesting, I think, but yeah, so yeah, that's one of my techniques basically, where you yeah, I've tested this around also in the studio at Notom, and I've basically invited sort of like, this is by no means scientific, but I just invited some people that I knew that had good ears, and most of them actually chose the SPS, what Angelo, what does it call it here, SPS, or, yeah, well, SPS approach, yeah. Most of the people I asked to listen actually preferred the SPS decoding of the signals that I did. But that was very specific materials. I don't say this works for everything, because it's you do lose some of the spatial depth sometimes, and especially if you use it with the Zelia plugin that I've been using, which also introduces a lot of free denoising. So you get a free two types of denoising things. Yeah, there's two types of denoising in that plugin that sometimes take away too much of your signal. So it's not always good. But it's one of the methods, and you know, if you don't have the money to buy an eigen mic or anything, which not everyone has, we'll have to do, and we'll have to work around it. And I think, yeah, that's a bit. I think, yeah, it's maybe a bit of a strange way to start a talk like this, but it sort of shows my approach to composition is always coming from a very technical background. Like, okay, I have this toy, what can I do with this, and how are there ways to work around it? So yeah, I'm not in that sense a very classical composer. I grew up with playing with guitar pedals and 4-track recorders in the 90s. So that's sort of how I came into electronic music. So yeah, the stuff I've been applying for here for the residency, I was talking about topographic timbral spatialization. And that's a very fancy bunch of words that I just put together, and I'm normally not that very good at it, and I basically have to admit that I stole parts of it from a guy called Erik Nyström. He's a professor in London. I think he's in Birmingham at the moment, and his thesis is about, let me get that up. And I saw a lecture of his online during the pandemic, and it really triggered some really good, hello, where is my mouse? Oh, there. Some really good, so I stole the topology of spatial texture. I stole the topographical thing from him, because his approach in this thesis is about steady points in a spatial sound, in a spatial field, where he puts a synthesis engine, and he's a super collider guy. So he has a line of code, and he puts that in the sound field somewhere, and then he has 10 or 12 other ones, any sorts, and basically he does not move the points. He just keeps them there. They're there. And basically the only thing he changes are the coordinates going to, or not coordinates, the variables for his synthesis engine. So if it's basically a noise generator and a filter and a ring modulator with an oscillator, he has very interesting ways of modulating these parameters in a way that they sort of play together. And if you have like 12 oscillators where you change the oscillation frequency very slowly, and you either phase it in a certain way that you have, if you like modulate it with a sine tone, that you make a nice phasing coherence between them, that they're not in the same phase, you get a movement with this tone. And if you at the same time then any other variable that you change in a different speed, you get a lot of movement for free. And so he's basically doing spatialization without spatialization. He basically has steady points. So his approach is mainly, what I've heard of him is either just octaphonic pieces, where he has like old-fashioned one speaker, one sound generator, or he's worked on a wavefield synthesis system like the one that they have in The Hague, where he places those points in the sound field, but the points never move. And when I read this, I really got thinking like, oh, this is nice stuff to sort of use in an ambisonic environment as well. So I have plenty of patches that I made in several different softwares, and I also did hardware with analog synth, where I basically have octaphonic stuff that I then later, again, beyond those the parameters that are being changed in there, also start like panning those around in with the ambisonic tools. So you get even more modulation. And yes, I will talk even more about modulation, because that's, I think, is the life of electronic music, modulation. And yeah, so that was one of the things that I thought of. At the same time, I was also working on a piece for the wavefield synthesis system in The Hague, which suddenly changed into a binaural festival because it was 2020. We all know why. And there I had a similar approach, but there I had a system where I basically had 32 filter bands and put sounds in them, and the 32 filter bands were all having different delay times, and they were all placed in this big sound field. And basically what I just did is throw a sound in those delay lines, and you get a lot of spatialization for free. And that's basically the whole background of the topographical timbral spatialization, because I have the different frequency bands in a different part of the sound field. And yeah, so I did this with a patch in the Super Collider derived wavefield synthesis software, which is a bit clunky sometimes, but still there's very many nice features in there. And the beauty is also that the person that writes it is very approachable, and he implemented some stuff that I missed because, yeah, he was sitting at home. It was a pandemic, so so yeah, that happened then, and I started thinking from there. I had already been using a software called Sound Particles that some of you might be familiar with from someone from Portugal. I forgot his name. You know him, the guy from
Yes, but I don't.
also also the name thing, yeah. Well, so and sound particles is basically a very, very common software for nowadays in Hollywood, where they do these big these big sound, surround sound textures, basically ambience, and you can do a lot in it, and it has its upsides, it has its downsides. I have been using it since 2018, and it has become a lot better. Computers have become faster. When I started out, I had an old computer, and it took me a night to render a scene. Now it takes me an hour sometimes if I'm going really crazy. But so I started thinking about this piece where I had this all these different frequency bands in the spatial field. Sound particles happens to have a similar feature where they have like a band filter that you can use, and it also conveniently has a standard impulse response that you can load, just one sample click that you can load as a default thing. So I started thinking, like, what if I generate a sixth order ambisonics, the max in sound particles. If I generate a scene with an impulse and use that sixth order ambisonics file as an impulse response, an encoder for mono sounds. And that took a while to figure out which plugins to use, and I could have done it easily in Spot, I later found out, but obviously, it takes a while. But I found an approach where I could load in Reaper. I could have a plugin from Melda where I could load in ambisonics impulse response, and then it's very important. Let me just show you how I generate these scenes and maybe play a little thing also. I've been working here on a piece this week with some sounds from a horn player that I worked with in Oslo, and from her sound repertoire I've chosen all these impulses that horn players do so very nicely, these very deep things. And I basically cut loose 37 of these impulses that I have in here. And they are being randomly spread over the sound field. And then the result sounds really stupid, but what comes after is even nicer. So what you then get is something like this. It's super simple. I'll play it again, but so that's a very simple thing. And what you then can do with this, let's see, where did that go? Here. Oh, this will take a while because a sixth order ambisonics impulse response is not as quick as with loading as you might think. Even with the computers nowadays, I will have to go to the correct one, of course. That's sorry for this, but yes. Okay, I have some, and again, this is very, let's see, this is a bit soft. Basically what I'm sending in now is just some impulses through a filter. I can widen the filter a bit. Or actually turn it off. So this is basically the impulse you just heard, triggered by another pair of random impulses again. Obviously, it's also possible to then start playing horn sounds through horn impulses. And there you see how long it takes. Some more noisy. So obviously this is a very narrow band signal through a horn. If you're using like a proper impulse response, you're getting way more hi-fi results. But yeah, like I discussed earlier with Johannes, I do like myself some lo-fi once in a while, and I think lo-fi in ambisonics is a bit underrepresented, and I think I'm willing to die for the cause. So yeah, I can probably play one of the more hi-fi things as well, because yeah, let's do it. Let's do that same horn sound. It takes a while. Getting the infamous beach ball on the screen. Look. Oh, I kept it nicely around the equator. I see this one, but and then the more noisy sound. Switching is not so easy with this. This is not something you put in your project. This is something you bounce out and then you use the end result in your project. Well, there's one thing that if you want to replicate this kind of behavior, one thing I have to make you aware of is that if you want to use an impulse response as an encoder with this plugin, or the cheaper one also works, by the way, the Melda Easy convolution. That one is for free, and I think you can do the ambisonics with the free version also, but I think it should work. But one of the things that's very important if you use that as an encoder is, hello, where is my, yes, is that you do this. If you have a mono sound, it goes to all the 94 channels of the 6th order ambisonics file, because otherwise it's not an encoder. There are other ways to do this, but they're even more unresponsive in playing than this. there is a plugin called Matrix Convolver that is in the Sparta library, I think, from Alto, and that deals with multi-channel impulse responses as well, but it is really even slower with starting up, so it will make you very much go for drinking coffee the whole time. So yeah, that was my implementation with this, with impulse responses, and obviously I have many more iterations of this, but I think I could go on about this kind of stuff for way too long. I think I've been talking for a bit long, and I think you haven't heard anything of what I've been doing. So I think I'll play you a short bit from an unused composition. That is, yeah, I'll first play it. It's unfortunately the text is in Norwegian, so I will have to talk a bit after the piece. Then I will have to see if I'm not gonna blow your ears out. Also very nice always to check that. Let's see. Yes.
I hvert sekund et menneske lever, det evig. Det jeg skriver i dette øyeblikket fanget i et av Fort de Trås fangehull. Fanget i et av Fort de Trås fangehull. Har jeg skrevet før, og skal jeg skrive igjen, for alltid. På et bord, med en fjærpenn, med de samme klærne, under helt like omstendigheter. Sånn det for oss alle.
That was it. Very short fragment. Thanks. This is a piece that has not been used. It's basically a result of a 2-week session I had with the guy that you hear speaking. He's a friend of mine. He is a writer and director, but also a musician. He has, I don't know how many masters and bachelors he has collected, but he's mostly active nowadays as a director in the theater. But during the Corona times, we started working together on audio walks, because that was one of the few things that was possible as a cultural medium during that time. So we did that for 2 years, and Rudolf is his name. Is very much a history nerd like me, and Rudolf is also from Oslo, original Oslo boy, and we really dove into the history of the plagues that have gone through the city. And so we made these 2 audio walks in a app you might know yourselves. It's a commercially available app for free. It's called Echoes XYZ, and it basically lets you map stereo files on a GPS coordinate on a map, and people see in the interface where the zones are, where you have to move, and then you can hear sounds, and that is basically how most people use it. But we had way too much time, and I was sort of like, this is interesting, because let's see how many zones we can stick over each other, because that's what a lot of people don't do when they look into this app. So what I ended up doing was making a lot of sound scenes with voices from the past, telling stories about what had happened at that spot. We were dealing with the plague, with cholera. There's plenty of stuff in the city there, as in all cities. We started out on ruins of an old church in Oslo, which is basically a historical site. And I made some ambisonic scenes that I layered over each other. And if you walk through the ruins, different files get triggered, and some of them stick longer. So we had a dialogue that was telling the story of the times there in the medieval times. But beneath that, you had several ambisonic binaural layers that would be triggered while you listen to the story. So yeah, we've done 2 episodes, you could call their 1-hour walks, both of them through Oslo, and unfortunately for people that don't master the Norwegian language, it's only in Norwegian. Sorry about that. I'm also still learning Norwegian, so I'm by no means a fluent Norwegian speaker myself, but so yeah, we after we've done those 2, we were sort of a bit fed up with doing audio walks. So we started thinking about doing something in the theater, but then maybe with an ambisonic setup. It's a very idealistic approach, which sort of landed very many negative reactions from the fund givers in Norway, of course. But what we got out of it was a 2-week sort of discovery project. So he wrote on his text, and we recorded what he wrote, and then I started playing with the words that he spoke, and basically what you just heard was only 5 or 6 lines from a text that is like 5-6 pages long. So, and this is all we have at the moment for this piece, because it's sort of the overture basically for a potential theater piece. What it's dealing with is quite political, and I won't go too deep into that, but it's basically about a revolutionary from the past that is trapped in one of those coastal forts in France, just in front of in the English Channel. They have these a few of those islands where they have these forts, and he's basically describing in this scene what his situation is and where he is. And so basically what I've been trying to do with this composition is sort of going with that flow, seeing what it that it sort of makes you feel a bit like you're locked into a tower, but yeah, it's always very subjective, I think. So, but yeah, we've been there for 2 weeks together in the studio in Oslo at Notam, trying to figure this out, and we often didn't work together, so I often kicked him out because I needed to do a lot of technical stuff, and it would be really boring for him. And but yeah, I like working with his voice. So basically all the material you heard in this piece was all his voice, except for the loud door bang that you heard, this vroom, that was a sample I think I stole somewhere. But for the rest is all based on his voice. And his voice, it's like with a lot of the stuff that I do, it's always like, I say this is all based on horn or his voice, you know. At a certain point, the material is so much treated that you more start to hear the tools than the origin. But for me, that is, in this case, it's still on the border where I'm thinking like, okay, I still hear a voice, but with the horn stuff that I've been working here, it's at a certain point I'm so beyond the horn, you know, once you've introduced feedbacking, pitch shifting, delays in there, and then it becomes synthetic. So that's I'm very much realized that's a point of critique that people can have on when I post like, oh, I only use the sounds from this. For this piece, I only was also a bit of a limitation I put on myself. It was sort of a thing that I wanted to only use commercial plugins next to the ambisonic, and I didn't use any Max or Spat. I just used commercial plugins and the IEM and the ICST and the Alto plugins. And basically what you hear is lots of iterations, lots of instances of the same granular plugin, and that's an approach I sometimes use. So I'm like, I have described this to Michael, so I'm very platform agnostic. So if something works, it works, you know, for me. If I can do something with a piece of paper, I would do it as well. So I think it's time that I play another piece, and maybe this time a bit longer, I think. This is a piece I made last year, and it's a bit more rough, but it uses a lot of the approaches with the convolution that I've done, and yeah, it's made for a festival we organized at a museum in Oslo, the Henny Onsdag Kunstmuseum. It's just 10 minutes outside of Oslo, and we had a 2-day festival there together with our friends from Audiorama from Sweden. So we had one program with the Swedish music and one program with people from Norway. And this piece was premiered there, and this was basically composed in honor of Xenakis' 100th birthday. And we had another composer, a friend that was in the organization as well, Mathieu Lacroix. He's a French-Canadian composer. And we both made pieces in this context, and we both have a similar background as people coming from the rather more metal scene. And basically Xenakis was for both of us a gateway to modern music composition. and mostly because of the textural roughness and the rather intense nature of his pieces. So we try to sort of evoke that instead of going for the mathematical approach that most people always associate with him. So it's not really a very pleasant sounding piece, I would say, but for me it sort of really, I've read a few biographies of Xenakis, and I think the first part of the piece is very much inspired by the moment that his face got blown off. So that's all I say. Thanks. Well, 4 minutes behind time, but I think if you have questions, fire up. I think that was the idea.
Any questions? Maybe just about this piece we just heard.
Mm-hmm.
So the material of this piece, that's also maybe coming. There's some synthesis.
Yeah. The second half is it's kind of funny how that came about, because that was actually from another piece, but it sort of like happens to end up in this piece, because next to doing electroacoustic music, I have a bit of a small secret obsession for drone music as well, and as you might have noticed, this is actually a 20-minute drone piece that I just took a snippet of, like, oh, this fits perfectly behind the thing, and that's most of the sounds you hear there are all from analog synths, but there's some digital stuff there as well. First part is mostly digital, but a lot of VCV rack in there also, which is sort of virtual Euro rack again. So it's a very modular piece in that sense. And most of the sounds in this piece are all synthetic, and even to the point that they're basically just noise into VST plugins, like 4 or 5 instances of the harp part you heard at the big loud part. There's suddenly this sort of harpy sound of thing. That's basically a pitch shifting delay also again. And there's just fed some noise in there, and then you get this this harpy thing because of the delay, and it changes the delay times. And again, everything is modulated. So it's just, yeah, I'm having a bit of I always I improvise a lot in the studio, let's say that. I don't go into the studio with stuff planned. I just start noodling around. And when I came here also, he was already like looking at me like, oh, you have 3 external hard drives with you. And it's basically, I come somewhere and then I was like, okay, what do I have? And I have all these beginnings of things that like, oh yeah, this was interesting. And then I start there, and the piece that I'm actually working on now here is actually started more or less from scratch, and I did use some techniques that I had in some Phantom Reaper sessions, but that were like, oh yeah, this is a nice technique to develop. Basically, when I don't have the time to do a full composition, I often do these little like sessions like, oh, this is nice. Or it's basically like you make a small max patch also, like, oh yeah, this is a nice idea, save it for later. And that's something I've learned, like, once you get a commission for something, you can just draw stuff from the rack and combine. And that's how this piece is in 2 parts is actually also partly time-related problem. Because I think I started the composition at the beginning of halfway October, and it needed to be finished at the end of November. So that was a bit of a rush job. And then when you have another second part, the second part was like adopted from this drone piece I had. But yeah, it fitted.
It's a very beautiful part. I loved it.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it is originally a 20-minute piece. And yeah, in that sense, I have many different musical lives over time, but also parallel to each other. But yeah, sometimes they cross each other. And the drone part actually comes more prominent in the last year. I've had the luck this year to do sound for a dance piece again. That's my old profession, is theater sound engineer for the Netherlands Dance Theater, and some people in Oslo asked me to do sound for a multi-channel version of a ballet with 10 speakers around the audience, with music from the band Sun, the drone band. And basically I sort of need to translate the experience of a Sun concert safely for a dance audience. So you can't really go full blown, but as close as possible. So it needs to be physical. And this second part actually also came about at the same time I was doing that piece. I was also doing those shows. So yeah, stuff starts leaking into each other. And I'm also a big fan of Phil Niblock, which sounds very much as a contrast to Xenakis probably for a lot of people, but for me not. I think Phil Niblock is also very complex music in a certain way. Yeah.
I'm curious about your composition workflow with the specialization. Do you have a certain specialization in mind when you do the sounds, or is it
No. No, I do have some mannerisms, I would say, but I often go for contrasts. So I often start with the sound, and if that is something that is very swarmy, and the things that I very much look towards is texture-wise. And that goes very literally sometimes. Like, for instance, this week I was looking like, okay, there's something missing in this piece. What am I missing? I'm really the kind of sucker that gets out an audio analyzer and like, okay, which part of the frequency range is still free? And that sounds really technical, but basically that's what a classical composer also does when he does an orchestra score. But I basically use analysis tools like, okay, I can still do something there. So that is one of the points that I look at. And spatialization-wise, it's pretty much similar, you know. It's mostly about contrasts. To have something going overhead, okay, then the next thing I do is mostly very low. And one of my key religions is that I mostly keep all this deep sub frontal, because in a concert situation, you're very rarely encountered that people have a surround sub setup. It is nice, but I often keep the subs in front because that's the most common way. A nice exception is the people from Audiorama in Sweden that do have a first order sub setup around their thing, which is super nice, but it's small ones, but it's good. So yeah, that's one of my things, but yeah, mostly it's contrast, and it's always informed by the material that I have. So yeah, like I said, I don't really plan much up front. I just go ahead and do stuff, and okay, I have this. What do I do next? Oh, this fits with it, and yeah, often, like for instance, what you heard in the voice piece there. Throughout the whole part there, you heard sort of a reverb of it's kind of a narrowish kind of cell kind of reverb. That was an ambisonics reverb that I used, but as you noticed, in the end, the whole text repeated again. It's the same text, but just in the front with a very narrow stereo reverb, just encoded to 2 points in the ambisonic field. And that's just because I do so much crazy stuff with the text. I thought it would be nice that people hear the text again, but then in a different context, sort of like focusing out. So my approach is always very much cinematic, I would call it. I'm thinking in like, okay, for like you have a portrait, you have a landscape, you know, and that's what I try to look at. Cinema is a very big influence in two ways in that, in the form, but also the sound design stuff. I feel sometimes closer to what sound designers do for movies than what certain composers are doing. That is something that I think is yeah. I've said this many times to many people, but I feel more related sometimes to that art than some of the electronic music I'm hearing.
I'm not sure if my question is interesting or not, but
I
you
think so.
said like in the theater 10 speakers and band sound you said, but is it also with rear band or sound is from band?
From?
Band music?
Yeah, band.
Oh, for the dance piece. Yeah, yeah, that's basically, it's
band.
yeah, but they're not live playing there. I'm playing their record. Sorry, I should have been more obvious because no, they would be finding it way too soft. They would fire me after 1 minute. These guys.
I thought rear band and also
No, basically.
How it's, what you care to.
Now, basically, what the guy has done is he has the normal CD we have on the main PA of the just in front of the stage, and then he made like sort of a caveman spatialization, I call it, he basically threw the whole CD through spring reverbs and plate reverbs and just. Yeah, and basically what you hear is it's a kind of a variety of my it's sort of an early version of what I'm doing with the impulse responses. So basically there's 8 extra channels with that are fed from recordings of the same material but through very narrow bands, and which is kind of nice because it's very flexible for me as a sound guy, because those speakers don't have a specific point where they need to be, so I can be very flexible. So every time that piece is being done in a dance theater, it's always different. Yeah.
Yeah, then thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for coming. And thanks for bearing with my improvisation also in the talk, because